With the fight thus ended and victory assured, Murat turned to two important matters: reporting to the emperor what had just taken place in Madrid, and sending off the Queen of Etruria, the old Prince Antonio, and especially the young Infante Don Francisco, who, frightened by the sound of cannon and musketry, now consented to follow his sister and his uncle. But this convoy could advance only by short stages, whereas it was very important that Murat's dispatches should reach the emperor as soon as possible. You can foresee what happened. So long as Spain had been quiet, Prince Murat had entrusted to his titulary aides-de-camp the numerous reports he sent to the emperor. But now that it was a matter of crossing a great part of the kingdom, in the midst of populations whom the news of the Madrid fighting would incite to assassinate French officers, the task fell to an auxiliary aide-de-camp, and this perilous mission was assigned to me. I expected it, and although, following the roster of duty turns, it was not my turn to set out, I raised no objection. Murat, judging very poorly the character of the Castilian nation, imagined that, terrified by the repression of the Madrid revolt, it would no longer dare to take up arms and would submit entirely. As he flattered himself that Napoleon intended for him the throne of Charles IV, he was radiant, and said to me several times as he handed me his dispatches, "Repeat to the emperor what I tell him in this letter. The victory I have just won over the rebels of the capital assures us peaceful possession of Spain." I believed none of it, but took good care not to say so, and confined myself to asking Prince Murat for permission to take advantage, as far as Buitrago, of the escort that was to accompany the carriage of the Spanish princes, for I knew that a great number of peasants from the environs of Madrid, having come to take part in the uprising, had, after their defeat, dispersed and hidden in the nearby villages and countryside, from which they could swoop down on me if I left the city. Murat, recognizing the soundness of my observation, let me take a post-horse, and, marching with the regiment that escorted the Infantes, I reached Buitrago that same evening, where the Spanish princes were to spend the night. Thus, from that town onward, there would be no more escort for me, and I was about to hurl myself into the unknown. Buitrago is situated at the foot of one of the offshoots of the Guadarrama mountains. The officers of our dragoons, seeing me ready to depart at nightfall to cross those mountains, urged me to wait for daylight. But, on the one hand, I knew these dispatches were urgent, and did not wish the Emperor and Prince Murat to be able to accuse me of having slowed my course out of fear. On the other hand, I understood that the more quickly I distanced myself from the environs of the capital and got ahead of the news of the fighting that had taken place there, the less I would have to fear the exasperation of the populations I was about to pass through. I was confirmed in this view by the ignorance in which I found the inhabitants of Buitrago regarding the events that had occurred that very morning in Madrid, and which they learned only from the muleteers driving the prince's carriages. But as the postilion I had just taken at Buitrago had probably heard the news from the one who had brought me there, I resolved to rid myself of him by a ruse. After travelling 2 leagues, I told the man that I had forgotten in his post stable a handkerchief containing 20 duros, 100 francs, and that, while considering that money as nearly lost, I still thought it possible that no one had found it, that he must therefore return at once to Buitrago, and that, if he brought me back the handkerchief and its contents at the next relay, where I was going to wait for him, there would be 5 duros for him. The postilion, delighted with this windfall, turned bridle on the spot, and I continued on to the next relay. There, no word of the fight had yet arrived. I was in uniform, but, to better dispel any suspicions the postmaster and his people might have on seeing me arrive alone, I hastened to tell them that the postilion's horse, which had been accompanying me, had fallen and been badly injured, and that I had urged the man to lead it back at a walk to Buitrago. This explanation seemed quite natural. They gave me a new horse, another postilion, and I set off again at a gallop, without troubling myself about the disappointment the Buitrago postilion would feel. The essential point was that I now had my secret to myself, and by stopping nowhere, I was certain of reaching Bayonne before public rumor could spread the news of the events in Madrid. I rode all night in the mountains. The road there is very fine, and at daybreak I entered Herma. There was a French garrison in that town, As well as in all the others I had to cross in order to reach Bayonne. Everywhere our generals and officers offered me refreshments, asking me what was new, but I kept my mouth shut, for fear that, should an accident force me to stop somewhere, I might be forestalled by the very news I had myself spread, which would have exposed me to attacks from the peasants. From Madrid to Bayonne is the same distance as from the latter city to Paris, that is to say, 225 leagues, a very long journey, especially when you cover it at full gallop, sabre at your side, without taking a single quarter-hour of rest, and in burning heat. I was, accordingly, exhausted. The need for sleep overwhelmed me, but I did not give in to it for a single minute, so fully did I understand the necessity of pressing on rapidly. To keep myself awake, I increased the postilions' tips on condition that they would sing to me, all while galloping, those Spanish songs I love so much because of their romantic naivete and the charm of their expressive airs borrowed from the Arabs. At last I saw the Bidassoa and entered France. Marac is no more than 2 relays from Saint-Jean-de-Luz. I arrived there, covered in dust, on May 5th, at the moment when the Emperor, coming out from dinner, was walking in the park with the Queen of Spain on his arm, and Charles IV at his side. Empress Josephine, Princes Ferdinand and Don Carlos followed them. The Grand Marshal of the Palace, Duroc, and several ladies came after. As soon as the duty aide-de-camp informed the Emperor of the arrival of an officer sent as a courier by Prince Murat, he advanced toward me, followed by the members of the Spanish royal family, and asked me in a loud voice, "What news is there from Madrid?" Embarrassed by the presence of the personages listening to us, and thinking that Napoleon would doubtless be glad to have the first taste of the news I was bringing, I prudently confined myself to presenting my dispatches to the Emperor, looking at him fixedly without answering his question. His Majesty understood me, and withdrew a few steps to read what Murat was reporting to him. When he had finished reading, Napoleon called me and moved toward a secluded alley, asking me numerous questions about the fighting in Madrid, and it was easy for me to see that he shared Murat's opinion, and that he regarded the victory of May 2nd as likely to extinguish all resistance in Spain. I thought the contrary, and if Napoleon had asked me for my view, I would have considered it dishonorable to conceal it. But I had to confine myself, respectfully, to answering the Emperor's questions, and I could make him aware of my sad forebodings only in an indirect manner. Thus, in recounting the Madrid Revolt, I painted in the strongest colors the people's despair on learning that they wanted to bring to France the members of the royal family who were still in Spain, the ferocious courage the inhabitants, and even the women, had shown during the action, the somber and menacing attitude the population of Madrid and its environs had maintained after our victory. I was perhaps about to let myself go so far as to reveal my whole thought, when Napoleon cut me off, exclaiming, "Bah, bah! They will calm down and bless me when they see their country emerge from the shame and disorder into which it had been thrown by the weakest and most corrupt administration that has ever existed." After this outburst, delivered in a curt tone, Napoleon ordered me to return to the end of the garden, to ask King Charles IV and the Queen to come and join him, and while I hastened my steps, he followed slowly, rereading Murat's dispatches. The former sovereigns of Spain having approached the Emperor alone, he probably announced to them the revolt and the fighting in Madrid, for Charles IV, quickly approaching his son Ferdinand, said to him in a loud voice, with the accent of the greatest anger, "Wretch, be satisfied. Madrid has just been bathed in the blood of my subjects, shed as a result of your criminal rebellion against your father. May that blood fall back upon your head." The Queen, joining the King, overwhelmed her son with the harshest reproaches, and even raised her hand against him. Then the ladies and officers withdrew, out of propriety, from that disgusting scene, which Napoleon came to put an end to. Ferdinand, who had not uttered a single word in response to his parents' severe remonstrances, resigned the crown to his father that very evening. He did so less out of repentance than from fear of being treated as the author of the conspiracy that had overthrown Charles IV. The next day, the old king, yielding to a base desire for vengeance, fomented by the Queen and the Prince of Peace, surrendered to the Emperor all his rights to the crown of Spain in return for certain conditions, the principal of which conferred on him the ownership of the chateau and forest of Compiègne, as well as a pension of 7.5 million francs. Ferdinand had the cowardice to renounce his hereditary rights in favor of Napoleon as well, who granted him an annual stipend of 1 million and the beautiful Château de Navarre in Normandy. This chateau, as well as that of Compiègne, being under repair at the time, King Charles IV, the Queen of Spain, the Queen of Etruria, and the Prince of Peace went to live provisionally at Fontainebleau, while Ferdinand, his two brothers, and his uncle were sent to Valençay, a very fine estate in Berry belonging to Mr. de Talleyrand. They were well treated there, but strictly watched by the garrison commanded by Colonel Berthemy, formerly one of the Emperor's orderly officers. Thus was consummated the most iniquitous spoliation of which modern history makes mention. At all times, victory has given the victor the right to seize the states of the vanquished after a frank and loyal war. But let us say it sincerely, Napoleon's conduct in this scandalous affair was unworthy of so great a man. To offer himself as mediator between father and son in order to lure them into a trap, and then to despoil both, this was an atrocity, an odious act which history has branded, and which Providence did not delay in punishing, for it was the war in Spain that prepared and brought about Napoleon's fall. We must, however, be just. While lacking political probity, the Emperor did not delude himself about what was reprehensible in his conduct, and I have from Count d'Effemont, one of his ministers, that he acknowledged it in full council. But he added that in politics one must never forget this great axiom: a good result and necessity justify the means. Now, rightly or wrongly, the Emperor had the firm conviction that in order to hold the North in check, it was necessary to found, under France's protection, a great empire in the south of Europe, something that could not be carried out without possessing Spain. Napoleon, thus put in a position to dispose of that fair kingdom, offered it to Joseph, his elder brother, then reigning at Naples. Several historians have blamed the Emperor for not having placed on the throne of Spain his brother-in-law Murat, who, accustomed to commanding troops and to the perils of war, seemed far better suited to govern an ardent and proud nation than the timid and indolent Joseph, a friend of the arts, totally a stranger to military occupations, and recently softened by the delights of Naples. It is certain that, from Murat's first entry into Spain, his warlike reputation, his tall stature, his fine martial bearing, his manners, in short, everything, even his bizarre costume, always plumed and varicolored, part Spanish, part French, greatly pleased the Castilian nation, and I am convinced that, if it had thought it must accept a king taken from Napoleon's family, it would at that time have preferred the chivalrous Murat to the feeble Joseph. But since the fighting in Madrid, whose results public rumor had infinitely exaggerated, the admiration the Spanish people had at first felt for Murat had turned into implacable hatred. I believe I am certain that the Emperor had first cast his eyes on Murat to make him king of the Spaniards, but that, later being informed of the aversion the nation had conceived against that prince, he regarded the thing as impossible, and sent him to reign in Naples in Joseph's stead, granting Joseph the crown of Spain. It was a great misfortune, for Murat would have been very useful for the war that soon broke out in the peninsula, whereas King Joseph was only a burden. To give his brother's accession to the throne of Spain a colour of legality, Napoleon had invited all the provinces of that kingdom to appoint deputies who were to meet at Bayonne to draft a constitution. Many abstained, but the greater number responded to the call, some out of curiosity, others out of patriotism, hoping that one of their two kings would be restored to them. They formed an assembly, but soon realized that their deliberations would not be free. However, some, guided by the conviction that a brother of the powerful Emperor of the French alone could make Spain happy, and others, driven by the desire to escape the trap in which they found themselves caught, all recognized Joseph's royalty. Yet very few stayed with him. Most hastened back to Spain, where, upon their arrival, they protested against the vote they claimed had been extorted from them. I had left Bayonne on May 11th to return to Madrid to Murat, to whom I carried the emperor's dispatches. I found minds greatly agitated in all the provinces I passed through, for there they already knew of the forced abdication of Ferdinand VII, the idol of the people, and they understood that Napoleon was about to seize the throne of Spain. Thus, insurrection was organizing everywhere. Fortunately, our troops occupied all the towns and villages situated between France and Madrid. Otherwise, I would certainly have been assassinated. I was escorted from post to post, which did not prevent me from being attacked several times. A cavalryman was even killed beside me at the passage of the famous defile of Pancorbo, and I found 2 corpses of our infantrymen in the mountains of Somosierra. These were the first fruits of what the Spaniards were preparing for us. The dispatches I carried to Prince Murat contained the letter by which the emperor officially announced to him his elevation to the throne of Naples. Murat was very gloomy for several days and finally fell so gravely ill that Napoleon, informed by Chief of Staff Belliard, had to send General Savary to take charge of the army's movements, something beyond his military abilities, especially in the difficult circumstances that were about to arise. The illness Murat had just suffered put his life in danger, and as soon as he was convalescent, he hastened to leave Spain, where he no longer had any hope of reigning, and had himself carried back to France. Before his departure, he called me into his office to ask whether I wished to remain in Madrid with General Belliard, who wanted to keep me. I had foreseen this question, and as it was by no means fitting for me, after having served several marshals and a prince, to go obscurely blend into the crowd of numerous officers of the general staff, there to perform almost the work of a courier amid musket fire, without glory or hope of advancement, I replied that Marshal Augereau, of whom I was aide-de-camp, had consented that I should serve with Prince Murat, but that from the moment that Prince left Spain, I considered my mission terminated, and requested to return to Marshal Augereau. I therefore left Madrid on June 17th with Murat. He was carried in a litter. His officers and a large escort accompanied him. We travelled by short stages and arrived on July 3rd at Bayonne, where the Emperor and the new King of Spain were still present. It was there that Prince Murat assumed the title of King of Naples. The officers of his staff, having gone to congratulate him on this, he proposed that we follow him to Italy, promising rapid advancement to those who entered his service. All accepted, except squadron leader Lamotte and myself, who had firmly resolved never to wear any uniform but that of the French army. I left my horses in care at Bayonne and went to Paris to join my mother and Marshal Augereau, where I passed 3 very happy months. The Battle of May 2nd and the seizure of the royal family had exasperated the nation. All the populations rose in insurrection against the government of King Joseph, who, although he had arrived and been proclaimed at Madrid on July 23, had no authority over the country. Spain has this peculiarity, that Madrid, the habitual residence of sovereigns, exerts no influence over the provinces, each of which, having formerly constituted a small separate kingdom, has preserved the title. Each of these former states has its capital, its customs, its laws, and its own administration, which enables it to subsist by itself when Madrid is in the enemy's power. Such was the case in 1808. Each province had its junta, its army, its stores, and its finances. However, the junta of Seville was recognized as the central governing authority. That concludes the 4th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.